Who dreams about going to faraway places? Well, duh. Everybody dreams about going to faraway places. I'm sure everybody listening to this podcast, everybody you know, we all do. But the thing about faraway places is that they're far away and they cost a lot and they take a lot of time. And there's work and family and life and all that sort of stuff. And one person who knows this extremely well is British adventurer and author Alastair Humphreys. He is the man who coined the term and helped popularize it, majorly popularized it, micro adventures. And he's recently written a book about staying home and exploring his own backyard. So on our show today, we have Alastair. Welcome to the AJ Podcast. I'm Stephen Casimiro, your host. With me is Justin Hausman. Hey, Justin.
Hello, everybody.
Hey, Justin, how many miles do you think you've ridden your bike this year?
You know what? I have an odometer on it, and I still couldn't tell you. What a good question.
Oh, you have an odometer?
Well, on my cargo. Well, it depends on which bike you're talking about, but my cargo e-bike, which is the daily driver, has an odometer, yeah.
Awesome. Well, take a guess. Well, hang on. Is it over or under 46,000 miles?
Way over. I'm constantly circling the planet, inspired by Al Humphreys.
Yeah. So Al, among his many adventure accomplishments, there's a period of his life where over 4 years, he rode 46,000 miles. He has crossed the Sahara. He's walked the empty quarter. He's gone unsupported across Iceland. He and some mates rode across the Atlantic Ocean unsupported. He's done a whole lot of stuff, and I have been in touch with Al for many years, and I'm thrilled to see him via camera for the first time and be in touch. Alastair Humphreys, welcome so much, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I've been a big fan of the Adventure Journal from this side of the pond for many years, so it's lovely to chat.
Yes, it is. So Alastair, as I mentioned, right from the beginning, has a new book called Local. And I've read it and enjoyed the heck out of it. And Justin has read it. And man, I found so many things in there that resonated with me. Some of the things that you're struggling with, some of the things where you're trying to find beauty and maybe places that are not really thought of as beauty. But tell us, what is the conceit behind the book? Tell us the prompt. What started you on this? What is this book about?
Well, first of all, thank you for reading it, and thank you for enjoying the heck out of it. I'm going to use that as a quote. I noticed you just said Justin read the book. No further comment on his opinion of it.
We'll just leave it right. We'll leave it right there. He has toddlers.
That's a big deal for me. Yeah,
yeah.
It has pictures, but also I'm really glad and relieved that you liked it, reading it from America, because it is a very, very local British focused book. And the essence of the book is that I didn't really feel comfortable with flying off to big adventures and then trying to encourage other people on my Instagram feed to go off and fly on more big adventures. So I wanted to try and find a way to have adventures and be in the outdoors without doing that. So I decided to go even smaller than the micro adventures I've been doing for years, and to just spend 1 year exploring the single map that I live on. In Britain, we have the whole country is mapped by something called the Ordnance Survey. I mean, every country has their own version of it. The nearest I think that I know of for you guys is the 1 to 24,000 topo series. It's basically a good level map that you'd use if you're going to go hiking in the backwoods or something. And so I bought the one that I live on. It covers about 20 kilometers by 20 kilometers, about 12 miles each way. The whole thing's divided up into 1 kilometer grid squares, and I committed to going out once a week for a year, rain or shine, to a randomly allocated grid square and try to see everything in that grid square. I was a bit worried when I had the idea that it might be really boring because where I live just outside a big city. It's pretty ugly, it's pretty boring, it's definitely not very adventurous, and I thought it might be really boring for someone who's just got chronic wanderlust. But yeah, that was the premise of the book. I've got the map here. It's a little sort of fold-out type hiking map that you might use, but it covers all the town streets and things, and the suburbs and the railway lines and the factories and just completely normal life. And I think if the book's got anything going for it, it's that it's not a wilderness in Alaska or something spectacular like that is just totally and utterly normal. And the premise was that we can all find nature and wildness closer to where we live if we just slow down and pay attention to things that are difficult to do in the 21st century.
I'm realizing right now, I'm very embarrassed to admit this, but behind me on my bookshelf, I probably have 50 topos for everywhere, every national park in the country, places in Canada, New Zealand, Europe. I don't have a topo of where I live. I mean, I have I have GPS on my phone, but I don't have one for Marin County. I don't have a single one for California outside the national parks. So
I think us sort of adventurous type people, we have a tendency to be like that, don't we? We think, right, adventure means go far. And so it's the very opposite of that I was trying to do. When I cycled around the world back in the day, you'd get some guidebooks when you went to different countries, like the Lonely Planet guidebook to China or something. So when I got home, I bought myself the Lonely Planet guide to Britain. And the reason I did that was because when I'm traveling off in other countries, I'm such an interested person. I love just daily life in random countries, and I find everything so fascinating. And then I get home and my shoulders slump and think, boring, home. My blinkers go on, I ignore everything. So one thing I was trying to do is get that traveler's mindset and curiosity and enthusiasm and just dump it right into my backyard. So I think you need to buy your local map, Justin.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, didn't I read in the book that you can go on to the your mapping website and locate any particular spot right in the center of the map? And so that the printed map that you just held up, is that you can order like a specific customized map based on any waypoint as center?
So this series is made by the British Ordnance Survey, originally used to make maps that we could fight the French. Like all British things, it involves fighting other people. So the Ordnance Survey, very detailed maps of Britain, and the whole country is about 400 maps because we're pretty tiny. But I guess they were, for the commercial market, they thought, hey, this would be a good gift option. So you can, put your house right in the middle of the map, and you can buy it either as the sort of fold-up version that you use to go hiking, or a big flat one, which usually when a friend of mine moves to their new house, I usually buy them their local maps to put framed up in the downstairs toilet, so they can just always be planning their runs and walks and things. Downstairs
ground zero.
Downstairs toilet is the place of honour in a British home. So if you get anything framed in a downstairs toilet, you've made it. So so they can be. You can either get the one off your shelf, or you can treat yourself to a customised one with your home in the middle.
Wow. Do we have that?
No.
God.
Well, you kind of have
you can do all kinds of orders, but I don't know that you can just put a pin in it.
But on the your government website for these Topo series, you can just look for wherever you are in the country, and it's massive, of course, and amazing. And download the map for where you happen to live, or you can pay for it to be printed. So there's lots of options for getting hold of them.
Yeah, well, we do. On the back cover of every issue, we do a different topo map, which we pull from that library. And some people, I think, know this, some people don't, but there's always a connection to something in the issue. And sometimes it's really obvious. And sometimes I just like to be as devious as I can and see if people can figure out exactly what that is, what the connection is. And somebody emailed us in the AJ inbox earlier this year, and he goes, I've gone through every story so many times, and I can't figure out what the connection is to the map. And I realized that I had taken some reference out of a story at the last minute, and that was the connection to the map. I was like, that poor guy. I felt so bad. So, well, you set up.
Sorry, I've got to interrupt you here with a fantastic adventure idea that surely someone now needs to cycle to all the maps that you have put on all your many editions of Adventure Journal. That's, to 31. Me, strikes like 31 maps spread across the United States. Someone needs to get on their bike and cycle between all 31.
I'll just say it right now. If you do that, you get a free subscription. You get a pack of our notebooks and something else.
A sticker.
A sticker. Wow, that's
and
such
a hearty
great
pat
feature.
on the back from me.
See, this right here is why Alastair goes and does these big mega things around the world, and I'm just in my backyard. Like the first thing he thinks of is like, you have to go ride to all of those maps. You have to do a loop of all of those maps. So Yeah. Well, so there's 400 blocks on your map. And when I first was reading this, I'm thinking, God, how is he going to do a different grid every single day? Like, how are you going to do this? So tell us about the construct. And then I want to dive into kind of what you're like, why you're driving force behind this, and then what you found like right from the get-go. So you randomized it and you decided you're going to do 52. You're going to do one every week, right?
Yeah, although I now, having published the book, realised I accidentally did 53. But yeah, so I like, I guess all of us who are into adventure and the outdoors, if you get a map, you start looking at it for great places to go cycling or camping and hiking and things. And I think we all probably who like the outdoors just do that naturally. So I didn't want to just gravitate to the areas that I would always naturally go to, the woodlands or the rivers or the place with lots of contour lines and hills. I wanted to explore the boring looking industrial park or the farmland with nothing at all. So I allocated where I went by a random number thing on the internet just to spread out where I went. So I think that was a really good thing to do. Another thing was I could have just got this map and said, I'll just explore it for a year and sort of amble around. But I find that putting structure and constraints on my adventures, firstly, it makes me actually persevere and keep going on them. But also I think it makes them quite interesting to put some constraints on. So my idea then was one grid square per week, rain or shine, dunk, dunk, dunk. And that would make me see all the seasons and keep plodding away through the year. So one grid square is 1 kilometre by 1 kilometre. You could, the ones with a road going through, you could drive across that in 1 minute. You could run across it in a few minutes. You could walk straight across it in 20 minutes. So it's just quite a small area. But if you commit to trying to see every street, every footpath, every bit of woodland, to learn about every bit of nature that you see along the way, then suddenly a kilometre becomes as large as you want it to be. And I thought that there wouldn't be much in some of these grid squares, but I'd quickly realised that there was so much. There's essentially an infinite amount of stuff in anywhere once you start to look and look and look. And to make myself look and look and look, I tried to take good photographs each week. So I took a camera, not just my phone, a proper camera, to really try and take the best photos I could. And if that was like a burned out old car, then I'd try and take a beautiful photo of a burned out old car. And I used a fantastic app called Seek, made by iNaturalist, which you're both nodding at, you aim your phone at a plant and it tells you the name of it, and suddenly it's not just a random little flower, it has a name. And
it's a dicot. It's a dicot. It's always a dicot.
It's always a dicot. It's always a dicot.
Yeah. But it gives you then a connection to it. And so then everything I saw, I'd write some notes and I'd come home and Google what I'd been seeing, and I'd learn about stuff along the way. So this random little plant, I'd learn the name of it, I'd come home, I'd Google it, I'd learn about the British folklore for hundreds of years of using it for medicine, or I'd learn about the history of burned out cars. So I would come home and Google what I'd seen, and then I'd write it all up. And my fears that one small map would be boring and limiting for a year quickly disappeared into a realization that, crikey, I cannot begin to see this map in 1 year. There is a lifetime's study here if I chose to do that.
Have you lived in this area for a long time, or is it like, did you know most of these places already, or have you only been there for a few years and this was kind of you exploring a little bit?
So I've lived here for 14 years. So a lot of the stuff that you might have seen me micro-adventuring over the years is based locally around where I live. So I've slept on lots of hills, ridden my bike, and camped in lots of places. So I reckoned that I probably knew certainly the countryside aspects of it better than most people. There were random little towns and villages that I'd never been to in my life. But I actually, once I started going even smaller and slower than micro adventures, I realized that actually I'd only scratched the surface. And actually on the micro adventures, I'd always just think, I'll go to those lovely woods. I'll go to that nice hill. I wouldn't think to go to these other places. So it really was a big discovery of seeing lots of things. And then to finish off the year for a sort of grand finale, I decided to try to cycle through every single grid square on the whole map in one continuous journey, which turned into a route planning plate of spaghetti. I mean, it was this crazy, wiggly, windy route of just zigzagging around. And doing that, I realized that there was so much stuff that I'd not seen even in this year of wiggling around. So The more you look, the more you realize you haven't seen anything.
This has been, Steve and I talk about this all the time. Well, I usually say it. I'm sure he feels similar, but one of my goals in life is to, like, I live in Marin County, California, beautiful place. I'm going to live here my whole life. And my main goal is to just know not even close to the depth of what you just described. My main goal is to learn every trail, to know every species of tree, to, if a bug crawls out, to kind of know what that is, to know what the plants are. I mean, that to me is heaven. And I want to get there at some point. I figure I got another 40 years or so before to hopefully accomplish this mission. But I can't even fathom expanding that out to places that aren't part of our own open space, that isn't part of our sort of natural environment, just including just the actual streets and towns. I mean, that's a pretty cool goal, but it absolutely speaks to me right now. It sounds fantastic.
Oh, good. I'm glad it resonates with you. I also started, things like the history or the culture or the religions. I mean, depending on what interests you in particular when you go out onto the map, I think that's what's fast. I did often think it would be great to be doing this with a different person each week, because they'd say to me, "Oh, look at this. This reminds me of some sort of Irish folk music or something," things that hadn't even crossed my mind. So, I think whatever tickles your fancy is a good way of starting.
There's so much depth in your landscape too. And you write about this, about the history and these things that you learn, and you stumble across things that are ancient. And so there is layer upon layer upon layer waiting there to be discovered in the UK.
Yeah, I'm often jealous of lovely California or say Marin County or fantastic place like that. But one thing this map really helped me to do is I've spent too much of my life wishing I wasn't here and wishing I was there, and grumbling and feeling sorry for myself that I'm here and being jealous that you're there. And what this map reminded me was, wow, this is amazing. The Romans walked down this footpath. The reason this path goes along the hilltop is because thousands of years ago, this was the safest way through the swamps. That's a good thing about exploring in Britain. I guess in California you've got some massive trees. In England we've got some really old footpaths. So they're all good.
I think that sentiment is one of the things that most jumped out at me, and Justin and I, we talk about this, but we talk about this in prep for recording, and is that there's this, this drive that all of us have as adventurous people, where we want to go to these wild and exotic places, and we want to see all parts of the world, and and it's expensive, and we have to leave our families often, and so how do we find that same kind of hunger for the local? How do we find that hunger? And because I live in a beautiful place. I live right on the coast, but it doesn't look like the Grand Canyon. It doesn't look like the Dolomites, And so one of the things I'm curious about, you talked about filling the holes that only expeditions can fill. And that was part of what you wanted to see if you could do. And I'm wondering, how well you succeeded at filling that hole, or whether you succeeded in filling something completely different, because maybe that itch, maybe that's a different itch, like going to the empty quarter versus learning more about your backyard.
Yeah, I suspect I just filled a different hole, I think. So I love big global travel, and I certainly don't intend to pull up the drawbridge on that, having done loads of it myself, and say to young people today, no, don't go do that. Just go and look at the rubbish dump outside your front door. That's much more interesting than China. So, of course, there's a huge potential in life for big, wonderful, bold adventures and proper epic wilderness out in the middle of nowhere stuff. That's great. I love that. So this wasn't about that. And when I was writing the conclusion, and you're sort of wanting to say, yeah, this book's achieved all my goals, I had to say, it wasn't really an adventure. I'm not going to try and kid anyone that it was an adventure, but it was really interesting, and it opened my eyes to other aspects of life that I hadn't perhaps given much thought to in all my years of just chasing madly around the globe. So I don't think it's a replacement for huge adventures, but if you're dreaming of the adventure of a lifetime, and in those years while you're saving up the money and the time and family and work and stuff, in all that time, then why not use your evenings and weekends to get out and explore your local map? So I think you can have both in life.
You have what, a couple kids?
Yeah.
How old are they?
they're sort of entering the dreaded teenage phase. So
Oh,
they
wow,
are,
okay.
to be honest, they're delighted I'm talking to you now because they get extended Fortnite and TikTok time while I'm doing this.
Well, I wondered if maybe they were younger because I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and we actually had somebody write us a comment, lambasting, I think mostly me for not getting out on big adventures anymore these last few years because I've made no bones about how I haven't been able to get out as much. But one of the things that I've really appreciated is, as you probably remember, and Steve does too, he has kids, but my little girls are so fascinated by just a walk around the block, and it takes us an hour, and like my 4-year-old was really excited a couple weeks back to show me these monarch caterpillars that she'd found, and so she'd like drives me around the block and we go look at them, and just every little thing. Like they always want to stop and play with like the cracked sections of the curbs, and it rained last week, so they're excited about the puddles and all these sorts of things. But it rubs off on you, in the sense that I'll do these little walks by myself. I'll walk. Now I want to go see, what are those caterpillars cocoons yet? Like what's going on? And little things that I hadn't noticed before, little areas of front yards that are pretty cool where people have planted things and stuff like that. But I wondered if maybe part of it was just that if when you have young kids, that sense that like everything is a wonder, like really, I'm like right in the middle of that. So I'm still pretty excited about it, but that it's changed my outlook on my local area for sure.
Well, Alastair, you write that you don't especially love where you live. You've had a hard time making friends, and I've often felt that where I am. There's adventurous people around, but it's hard to find them, and I don't feel like the place that I live doesn't have a culture of adventure, and that you can feel isolated at times. So did that change how you felt about yourself and your place in it, in the exploration? Did you feel better about it? Did you learn, after 53 quadrants, did you feel more connected to it?
Yeah, so one of the reasons that I really wanted to commit to trying this project was to try and offset my frustrations and resentments and boredom and loneliness of living where I do in suburban edgelands, just on the edge of a city. So that was definitely a motive for me doing it. And in that sense, it was fantastically successful. I found far more wildness and beauty than I'd imagined. I'm often snooty that there's no proper countryside around here, but when I started going out, it's like there's woodland and stuff everywhere. There's loads of stuff. So it definitely helped me appreciate where I lived more. It definitely got me much more connected to the issues of the land that we live on in our neighborhood, and more concerned about trying to actually do something about it. I quite often felt that I care about the planet and the environment, as I'm sure all your listeners do, but it's when you just read the news, it's like, the whole Amazon's being chopped down, and Antarctica has melted this week. And you're like, wow, this is terrible. Well, I can't even begin to fix that, so I'll just go and have a cup of coffee and get on with my life and feel a bit depressed. But when you just go out to your little local woods and you see, hey, they're going to chop down these woods to build a McDonald's or something, then you're like, hey, I can do something about this. I can connect to it and feel engaged with it. So I feel much more grounded and settled and accepting of where I am, for sure. I think that's been really good.
Wow. Cool. Well, we're going to take a quick break. We will be right back. You love adventure, we love adventure, and that is why we created Adventure Journal in print. It is the gift that we've made for ourselves and for our friends, and hopefully for you, that is analog, that gets away from screens, that gives you some of the most interesting, deepest, and thoughtful stories from some of the best writers and photographers working in the outdoor space. We do 4 a year. You get free shipping and a deep discount. It's $60 to have this absolutely beautiful, no batteries necessary celebration of adventure in your mailbox. Get it at adventure-journal.com. I am drinking, it's gotten cold now because we're halfway through the show. I am drinking Long Weekend Coffee. We launched Long Weekend Coffee earlier this year to bring you and us blends that are not fussy, that will take any kind of brew method that we like, whether it's at home, in a cabin, on the tailgate of a truck, doesn't matter. We have 4 blends. We have dark, medium, espresso roast, and a decaf. I think they're pretty amazing. I guarantee you will like them. Check us out at longweekend.coffee. Welcome back. We are still talking to Alastair Humphreys and so excited about it. It's just such a delight to have a conversation with you, Al. Thank you again. So where we left off, you were talking about, we're sort of talking about the macro versus the micro, basically about like looking out big versus looking small. One of the things that changed for me during COVID, where I felt like I couldn't really go anywhere, but I was, I just had itchy feet. I was antsy, and I would just go on these walks, and I would take Seek. Seek became my best friend during COVID. And there's this green belt. And I wrote a feature story for AJ in print about my experience. And I think that it was really transformative for me, not trying to move through landscapes so quickly on a trail run or, a mountain bike or on skis, but actually slow down. And the idea of, you can make a kilometer as big as you want really does resonate. I got to know individual plants in this one particular area. There was this one black sage that I would always come back to and see where it was in the process of blooming and what bugs happened to be on it. And the sense that I have of where I live now and my connection to it is so amplified. And so I would love it for you to sort of address how your relationship with the land changed and why that might be important. Because one of the things that is really clear is that we, as modern Western consumers, we have lost connection to land, and we do get all up in arms about what's going on in the Amazon, but we don't really have a sense of what's going on in our own backyards. We don't know the names for things, and you learn the names for things. And so take us on that journey a little bit, and why is that important? How can other people do kind of what you did and feel a stronger connection to what's around them?
So a lot of what I did would echo what you just detailed as your own experience of the slowing down, of the paying attention, the noticing how a favorite tree changes through the season. So I, slightly aside from this, but linked, as I've spent for the last 3 years, I've been climbing a tree once a month, which I have scheduled into my Google Calendar. So again, the notion of scheduling and adventure into your life to make it actually a regular feature. So once a month, ding, first Wednesday of the month, I go climb my local tree. And every time I climb it, I look down and I'm like, wow, what? The universe has been busy since I was last up here. So much has changed. And how have I not noticed any of that? And then I sit in the tree for 20 minutes drinking a cup of tea or a coffee and up in the tree, and just slow down. I don't need to be charging around answering emails the entire time. Just slow down. And it's a chance to just think a little bit about maybe what I'll do in the next month before I come back to this tree. Deep breath, and then I return to the mayhem of busy life. So that has really helped my relationship with the land, this sort of scheduled, regular tree climb. I did the same with a full moon walk, run, cycle, or swim last year. I did a year with Anna Brones, American paper cut artist, who I'm sure you guys know, who we both like adventure, we both like coffee. So once a month, we would give ourselves a task like go and have a swim and then a coffee, or go out in the rain and sit under a tree and have a coffee. And I would write a little essay about it, and she would do a beautiful paper cut about it. So again, that was just an excuse to force ourselves to get out into the outdoors regularly, and a creative way to slow down and pay attention and just not feel the compulsion I often have to just charge as fast as I could from A to B. So slow down. What is it? Pay attention. Oh gosh, I've forgotten it. I know. Some very clever Mary Oliver things. Pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. That's it. Her instructions for life, and I held that in my mind a lot.
You tried a couple of times, at least 2 times, if I'm recalling it correctly, to sit for an hour and just observe. How'd that go? Yeah.
I would sometimes I'd go out to do this map thing, and I'd be like, I haven't got time to be doing my stupid map. I need to get home and check Twitter, or whatever busy people do in this day and age. And then I'd be like, Al, just stop being ridiculous. You're in the interesting project. You're out. You spend all your time at home moaning that you're not out in the outdoors. Now you're in a wood wishing you were back home on Twitter. You're an idiot. slow down, just sit down on a log and turn off the phone, no distractions, throw my watch beyond reach so I can't be distracted by the clock, and just, can I sit for an hour? And I find it an agonizing process. My mind's racing, like, oh, I'm bored, oh, I'm hungry, oh, I've got an itch, and then I have 10 brilliant ideas for an award-winning novel, but I haven't got a pen to write them down, and the mind just racing and racing. So I think a lot of this whole project was along the lines of mindfulness, really, just noticing what you have right now, not what's over there or over there, just what you've got now. It passes through, and that is enough. So I think quite a lot of the book was, not the book, but the project on a personal level was about trying to make myself just slow down, pay attention, and accept that what I've got now is good enough, and sitting on a log in the forest is good. There's an old Buddhist, wise Sanskrit ancient saying that I learnt on the internet along the lines of, if you're too busy with checking your emails to spend 20 minutes in the forest, then you need to spend an hour sitting on a log in a forest. So the busier you are,
passage.
yeah, the more that you're listening to this thinking, geez, this guy's lucky, he can sit in the woods for an hour, I can't do that. The more you're thinking that, the more you perhaps might benefit from giving it a try.
Did you actually do it?
Yeah, I do it quite often now. I mean, I wrote about it twice in the book, but I did it 5, 6, 7 times in the actual year, and I do it. I haven't started scheduling it. Perhaps I should, but probably every couple of months. It's usually when I'm like, oh, I'm so busy, and then I think, wow, this is not really that important in the grand scheme of things. Go and sit in the woods for an hour.
So your next book is going to be like the 12 steps I took to become a Buddhist, basically.
Well, I would. You know what? I wouldn't be entirely unhappy if it was.
Yeah, Justin wrote about a guy who created these records for the longest sits outdoors.
I was just trying to find his name the whole time. Like, I've just been quietly tapping on Google trying to I can't remember his name. I don't know if you've heard of him, Al, but he's like made a point to. I think he actually is in the Guinness Book of World Records for sitting in one place for the longest. He goes to beautiful places. He's not just like sitting in like a Walmart parking lot or anything. But he's done a day or two.
So didn't some Greek philosopher guy live on top of a pole for years?
Well, maybe, because there's pole sitting is a big thing in Canada, where you sit on a pole for as long as you possibly can. But that's more of a physical element. This guy we're talking about had a nice comfy chair, which probably makes it worse. There's no way I could sit for an hour. I care how beautiful it was. Maybe if there were like perfect waves and I was watching those or something like that. But an hour. Whew.
Well, that's Brendan's, Brendan Leonard, our good friend to all of us, his theory that there's two kinds of people. There's soakers and there's non-soakers. There's people who can soak in a natural hot spring or a hot tub for as long as it takes. And then there's people that just can't. And I know 2 or 3 of us are non-soakers. And I think the third here is probably, and Brendan is definitely not a soaker. So,
wish I could be.
Yeah.
Sounds great.
The monkey brain. So Scotland has a right to roam encoded, right? It's codified in their law. There are places like in Scandinavia, Norway, Sweden, with all I don't know how I'm pronouncing it right, but allemansratten, which is all man's right, basically, to have access to lands, tied in closely with friluftsliv, which is sort of open air life, which we've also written about, this idea of being out and connected in nature. But Britain doesn't, right? Or England doesn't. Is that correct? So tell us about your ability to roam free or not free, and how that affected your experience.
Okay, so I might now go off on a long rant. So when you get bored, put up your hand and I will draw it to a close. But I'll try and be as concise as I can. But there are a few issues here. Let's start 10,000 years ago. Wherever we lived 10,000 years ago, you could just wander around the countryside and you could go wherever you want and you could do whatever you wanted. You'd eat some berries and catch some fish, and it was all quite nice. You could, of course, if you wanted to, eat every single berry and eat every single fish and just feast, and then there'd be none left and you would die. So I suppose over time there evolved a notion of a right to roam responsibly. So you're roaming around the land, but you're taking care of it because it's vital. You care for it, you love it. If you care for it, it will care for you. And that's roughly what modern day Scandinavia has now, roughly. Allemansrätten, every man's right, every person's right to roam responsibly. And I think the word responsibly is key at the end of this. But in Britain, then, so Scotland, without going down a whole UK politics thing and dreaded conversations about Brexit, but in simple terms, Scotland is part of Great Britain, the United Kingdom, but it does have separate laws in some aspects. And one of those is they have a much looser right to roam than in England, which is based on Scandinavia's really. So in Scotland, you can wander around the hills, put up your tent pretty much wherever you want. And there are some common sense restrictions, like you can't wander through a person's garden, you can't wander through a farmyard full of busy machinery, you can't wander through the middle of a wheat field and trample down the crops, you can't light a fire in the middle of that wheat field, you can't leave your litter lying around. All entirely common sense stuff to people who are interested in the outdoors and the adventure world and the whole leave no trace type principles, which I'm sure we're all familiar with, and to people who are interested in the outdoors just seems obvious. Come down south into England and we do not have that right to roam. So most land in Britain is privately owned. As 8% of the land is sort of common open ground. What we do have in England and Wales is about 140,000 miles of public footpaths, and some of these are thousands of years old. And these go literally everywhere, through towns, villages, round the back of farms. They're everywhere. It's fantastic, wonderful. And the majority of my time in the countryside is quite happy just wandering around these. And for all my life, I've mostly been kind of happy with that. But trying to explore a grid square, you want to see more than just what this narrow little footpath is telling you. I wanted to see what was in that woodland there. And generally, I found the woodland had big signs up saying, "Keep out, private, keep out, go away, you horrible poor person, keep out of my woodland." And I have got a fairly relaxed approach to these regulations, so I would just ignore that and I'd go wandering around the woodland. Of course, I would do no harm to anything at all, and then I'd leave and no one would know I was there. And over the course of the year, I felt increasingly frustrated about how restricted my legal access to the land was. And I was frustrated for a few reasons, which I will be brief on. For example, I was horrified at the state of nature depletion in Britain. Britain has one of the worst levels of nature and wildlife in the whole world. It's terrible. We've almost ruined all our nature. And the way we treat the land through our industrial farming is pretty horrific. So if the notion is you should not be allowed access on our land because you will damage the landscape here, then that's clearly nonsense, because the way the land is being used at the moment is ruining it through industrial farming and loss of nature. I also think that because we have this culture of not being allowed access to the land, you can't care for what you don't know about. We've talked about this several times in this chat already. Because people are not roaming around that woodland that I was in, they don't know to care for it and how important it is to farm in a way that's sustainable for nature and the planet, etc. So I started to get increasingly annoyed about the lack of access to roam responsibly. And I think the key thing, whenever I hear the word right to roam, there's a really great campaign in Britain called the Right to Roam, and they're fantastic people. I'm big fans, but I do always like to add the little responsibly at the end of it, because what I want to see is people, like in Scandinavia, accessing the land and doing so with love and care, and then coming home and caring about the food that they buy from the shops and voting for politicians who will also care to clean up the rivers and stuff. So that's a brief potted history. And then, of course, you head over to America, where the whole notion of land access and is an entirely different can of worms, which you can, I guess, either choose to talk about or not, as you wish.
I'm wondering how you was it like the first time you stepped across the no trespassing sign, where maybe you do this all the time, but was it like butterflies, and then by the end of it you're not even noticing them, you're just walking wherever you want? Did it take some doing?
Well, I say this not in a glib way at all, but I think one of the key things to bear in mind is that in Britain people aren't walking around with guns, and therefore,
right, of course,
if you trespass on somebody's land here, well, almost certainly nobody will even notice. I've wrote a whole book, Micro Adventures, which is essentially based on the notion of go sleep on a hill. Nobody will ever see you there. You'll be totally fine. If anyone does see you, you have a nice, polite, friendly chat, and then you leave. Or worst case scenario, some farmer goes, get off my land, and then you leave the land, and that's the end of it. Which, by the way, only happened to me once in this book, and in all my years of micro-adventuring, never happened. So generally in Britain, you might just get shouted at by an angry farmer. You're not going to get shot. I think one thing that is important to note, though, is that I am a 6 foot white middle-class man, and therefore how I feel about some farmer saying, get off my land, is different to if I was black or a woman, and so on. And so in that sense, the accessibility to the British outdoors isn't as widespread as I'd imagined beforehand. But generally speaking, the only nervousness I feel is just because all my life I've been taught, don't be a naughty boy. But generally I was pretty happy. And actually increasingly I was just like, why can't I go in this wood? I'm definitely going to go walk around this wood now. So I got increasingly keen on the trespassing side of the campaign.
Well, you got yelled at once too when you were on a public footpath, didn't you, by a farmer?
I got yelled at once, yeah. And interestingly then, I wasn't trespassing. I was on a footpath. One thing that was really interesting about this whole thing was how much it made me try to remember to see these conversations from different sides. So the reason the farmer was angry was because he had his nice field of cows and he was busy working hard being a nice farmer, and he'd get quite annoyed because every so often walkers would just walk through his field, and that's I guess a little bit annoying. It's certainly annoying if they leave litter or if they let their dogs run around and scare the cows. And so I guess over time he just got fed up with people walking across the land. But I was legally allowed to do so. So we had a discussion about this, which was really interesting to see things from his side, which was an issue that kept popping up time and again. I'd have this sort of righteous belief in something, and then something would happen to make me think, well, hang on, these other people need to live on this land and make their living from it, and they have different priorities to me. So yeah, it's complicated living in a crowded little country.
Yeah, it sounds like it opened up your view quite a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it really did. It hardened some of my views, and it softened some others. But even on the views that I got hardened on, I think it was really helpful for helping me see different perspectives on that as well.
One of the things that runs through the book is, I guess, a sense of dismay at what you see out there. You see a lot of pollution, you see a lot of junked cars and whatnot. And you just mentioned about how in England you guys have a poor track record of taking care of your natural bounty. So I'm wondering, tell us a little bit more about like those tensions that you saw out there, and also about, I think, a really important concept of shifting baselines, that as we are struggling with climate change and, oceans being depleted, that is a critical concept that can skew how we see things. And if we are not out there kind of ground truthing, which you spend a year ground truthing your neighborhood, if we're not out there doing that, then we're not going to have a sense of that. So tell us about like those things that you saw that troubled you, and how the shifting baselines are connected to that.
Okay. So I hope my book's not too depressing. I had to really try to offer some upticks to some of the doom and gloom, because some of my early editor readers were like, no one's going to enjoy this book. It's really miserable. So, and I suppose part of that is... It's not,
by the way. It's not miserable.
Okay, I guess part of that is... It kind of depends where you go do this adventuring. I mean, my guess is that if I spent a year walking around Marion County, I'd be like, woohoo, this is awesome, and I'd write lovely stuff. But equally, if I paid enough attention, I'm sure there'd be things there. I'd be like, whoa, hang on, this isn't actually as nice as maybe it seems. And so Britain, we're an old, crowded... country, the first country in the world to industrialize, and the at times of the empire rulers of half the world. And what that meant doesn't excuse, but what it explains is that we cut down pretty much all our trees. We've only got 13% forestry now. Europe's a 30% on average, so we've got hardly any trees. we've turned all our land into farmland, and then we made loads of factories, essentially. And they were decisions that had been made over hundreds of years. But I grew up in the English countryside, and I've always thought, oh, the English countryside's beautiful. Look at those lovely green hills, and there's one nice tree on the top of it. You might have seen in the news recently that famous tree that got cut down in Britain. And everyone in Britain was so sad that, they've chopped down our most famous and beautiful tree. That's really bad. And on the one hand, I was quite delighted that, wow, a lot of people do care that this tree has been cut down. But mostly I wanted to say, hang on, why is there only one tree in this entire country? You're missing the lack of trees for the single tree. This is a bigger problem here. We've got nothing here. And this leads on to shifting baseline syndrome. So I used to think, England's lovely green countryside, and I can hear a few birds tweeting around, and that's lovely. That's how countryside should be. But unfortunately, now that I'm an adult, everything's really bad and the world's all doomed. But what shifting baseline syndrome reminds you is that if you speak to my father, what nature was like when he was a little boy in England was much better than when I was a little boy. And you ask grandfather and grandfather and grandfather, what they saw as normal nature is totally different to me. But because I just grew up with that level of nature, I've always thought, that's what nature should be. We need to try and get back to what it was when I was a little boy. And that's the notion of shifting baselines, whereby each generation we accept a worse condition for our planet on the assumption that that's normal because it's all that we've ever known. And one scientist I talked to, he believes that this is the single greatest issue for the conservation movement, our general erosion of acceptance of what is an acceptable level of nature in the landscape.
Right. Yeah, I keep coming back to, well, first of all, I do have to say that the book is optimistic. It's upbeat, but I think you take a clear-eyed view of these things that are all around you for good and bad. And I think what you experienced and what I've experienced, I mean, I just can't stress for enough people to get the Seek app and go learn the names of plants and, get your Star Walk and learn the names of stars. I mean, the sense that you have of living in the world and being connected to it can be profound. I mean, that's what happened for me. And having a sense of how things unfold through the seasons. I don't know if you've read Aldo Leopold's Sand County Almanac, which is, hailed kind of rightfully for its section arguing for new land ethic, a new relationship with the land, which kind of helped galvanize the environmental movement. The thing that my biggest takeaway was what a keen observer of the lands around him that Aldo Leopold was, and what he knew about the critters, the birds, how things changed through the seasons. And I think that one of my lessons from your book was, I come back to the idea of the nature deficit syndrome. Like, clearly this culture, the people in this culture need a lot, right? Mental health, these issues are at all-time highs, all this sort of stuff. And yet we know, there's this hunger that we're trying to fill up with these other things. And sometimes that may be expeditions. But I think it's connection. And it's not just connection with people, but it's connection with nature, which we're a part of. And so this sense of getting out and knowing it personally feels really, really critical to me, both from an environmental conservation perspective, but also just purely from a personal perspective. I mean, did you feel, you sort of talked about this time that you spend out there when you need to kind of reset yourself. Did you feel like your relationship and your kind of internals were changed from your time spent observing much more closely?
Yeah, that very much had a big impact on me. And before I go off on my latest long-winded waffling answer, I'll also add Merlin to your list of apps, which listens to birdsong. That's an absolutely fantastic one. So when I started this book, I thought it was going to be Micro Adventures Take 2. Al the Adventurer has a fun time zooming around the local hills where he lives. And yet the book's nothing like that at all. I never set out to write a nature book. I don't know anything about nature or science or anything. I've always been willfully non-political in my public life. I've been like, oh, Al, the nice guy, adventure guy. So it's really by paying attention to this book that it just wrote it. All these issues became far more clear and relevant to me. I mean, that the book Aldo Leopold that you were mentioning about, he writes about ecological grief. You know, one of the problems, once you start to see how wrecked the land is, then you end up with this ecological grief that you're carrying around everywhere. Like, that's not a lovely green hillside. That is a desert of grass with not a single insect growing in there. There's this sort of grief that comes once you start to learn about the problems that are there. And then the notion of nature disconnectedness or nature disconnection, nature deficit is something that I kept coming to time and again on this book in terms of there's all sorts of endless statistics, aren't there, about how children in Britain spend less time outdoors than prisoners. They spend more time on their screens than doing anything else. There's a nice app and a fellow podcast called 1,000 Hours Outside, which is kids spend 1,000 hours a year on their screens. So this woman Ginny set out to have a campaign to, well, let's spend 1,000 hours outside as well. And isn't it ridiculous that you might say to someone, right, this year you have to spend 1,000 hours outside, and they're, whoa, that's a lot of time outside. Well, that's exactly how much time you spend on Twitter and TikTok. So we are completely disconnected from society. And what I personally found from my experience this year was that every time I went out on these trips, even when I felt busy and stressed or it was raining and grim outside, every time I felt better afterwards. So it was better for my physical health, it was better for my mental health. By going slowly with these apps we've talked about, I learned more about nature and I learned to care more about nature and the problems that are on our land. And I realized how all of these things connect with, they're all connected together. If we can get more people outside more often, paying attention with a greater access of roaming responsibly, then they're going to care more about fixing nature, fixing the planet, cleaning up the rivers. They're also going to come home feeling physically healthier and fitter and mentally happier, and then hopefully going to eat some healthier vegetables from the farm rather than junk food grown with endless corn, which completely destroys the land, and round and round and round it goes. So it seemed not easy, but quite simple to me, the power of just doing something like this regularly. And it can be wherever you live, on whatever amount of time you have available in your own life, I think.
And free. I mean, just
Yes.
walking out the door, I mean, it's free.
Yeah,
So-
this trip was certainly cheaper than this year was certainly cheaper than rowing across the Atlantic Ocean or something like that.
Why? There's no Starbucks out there. I mean,
Yeah,
what did you have?
Yes,
Speaking
that
of
is true.
coffee, because we can't go too long with speaking about coffee, one of the things I loved about the book is just your frequent stops. And there were pub stops for beer, but there were also stops where you made coffee. Like, you didn't go to your thermos of coffee, you made coffee. So what was your coffee kit? How often were you like caffeinating in the middle of every grid? Tell us about that.
So having coffee outdoors is, for me, it was mostly an extension of sitting on the log for a while. You know, most places I was going were, most of the grid squares there was a shop on, for example. You know, it's a pretty built up area. I was certainly never very far from a cafe. Sometimes I did take a thermos flask of coffee, and that was generally just to keep me warm in cold old winter. But what I really enjoyed was that when I would just take my camping stove and make coffee out there, and that's a nice thing to do, and a nice cup of coffee. But more importantly, it was like, right, Al, you could just kind of sit in this wood or on this park bench for 10 minutes while the coffee brews. Whew, slow down, that's fine. And in terms, I can tell you that you're a coffee aficionado. So my technique generally is one of two things: is either an AeroPress or a mocha pot. Does that translate to America? A mocha pot.
We know
yeah.
mocha pots. Yes.
Okay,
We're backwoods,
cool.
but we're not that backwoods.
Okay, yeah. So there's generally one of those things, strong and black, and just slow down and enjoy being out there.
I got to get you some of our coffee that we're doing now, the long weekend. I got to get some, because Anna and I are friends, and yeah, coffee makes our world go round. So we're going to have to get some in your hands. Sorry, Justin, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
This is something that I've kind of picked up on doing myself the last few years, which is, just making coffee in places that I wouldn't normally otherwise do it. Mostly for me, it's like going up and fishing at these lakes nearby, which, yeah, it's like camping, but you're not supposed to have, you can't camp there. You can't have a fire. There's, all sorts of things you're not supposed to do, but I still bring my little coffee pot, and sometimes I'll heat up soup. My little, camp stove at the back of my truck, or if I ride my bike up there, I'll sometimes take my coffee kit with me. But I've started doing it even just like in the park, like at our little neighborhood park. And it's like this little act of rebellion in a way, even though you're not doing anything wrong, but people will look at you like, what is that guy doing? You get your little backpacker stove set up, and there's two cafes within 50 yards, but, if you haven't done that, do it. Like if it's one thing to make coffee while you're camping, but to make coffee in a place that you wouldn't normally do it, it's just another little like opening into the sort of the magic of what like your little area can be. It's just a weird little thing that just takes you out of your normal day, and it's a really special moment. So I was happy to see that too.
I would also add to that, Justin, what you're doing is the notion of doing that with your kids, like on a Saturday morning, of going to the local wood and making a hot chocolate or a bacon sandwich or whatever it is, but to have that out in the woods. So that turns breakfast into adventure, and that's a really nice thing to do.
So we're going to bring this to a close, unfortunately, because it's so fun. Justin, did you have anything you wanted to ask? And Alastair, is there anything that we have missed, themes or otherwise, that you want to make sure that people know about?
I want to know if at the end of this, did you find places that you're returning to? Did you find, like, I'm sure you did, but little benches, little woods that are now special places to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So my instinct whenever I've been running or cycling generally is to head for woodlands or contour lines and hills. That's what I really like. But where I live, there's quite a lot of flat, open marshland, drained marshland, which until I did this year had always struck me as just, boring and empty. But actually I really like that. It's atmospheric, it's empty, it feels ancient and quiet. So yeah, really the marshes I've come to really enjoy and go back to quite often.
That's cool.
Interesting.
I'm not really a marsh fan, but I could see that. I could get
But
that.
there's a lot going on there.
Oh yeah.
These marshes, they're not like where the crawdads sing, or they're not good old American marshes. This is basically to you guys, I guess, and to me before I started, it would just look like it's an empty flat field with nothing in it. So but a big sky. And of course, living where I live, massive electricity pylons stringing all over everywhere. So there's not much illusion of wildness. But I've come to quite enjoy the pylons as well, though.
Are you in the Pylon Admirers Club that I learned about from you?
Well, there were various clubs in my book, weren't there? There's the Pylon Appreciation Society. There's the Cloud Appreciation Society. And Telegraph.
I think we're all in
that.
I think everybody's in that society.
Yeah, we have to pay £15 to actually be in it.
Get a card.
One of the things that I loved about the book were I learned so much about birds and how they make sounds differently than humans. And, I'm sure a lot of these are the result of your Googling when you got back, but you give us it's not just Al running around in the world, like you teach us so much about the world around you and how that your local world is connected to the broader world. And it's a wonderful, it's a wonderful tour of small and big at the same time.
Oh, good. I'm glad you say that. I'm particularly glad that it's not too British centric. The whole random learning part of it was very new to me. So I was lucky I went to university, but geez, I wasted my time at university basically reading adventure books. And yet this year I'd come home because I was making myself just try to believe that everything was interesting. That was the sort of, right, you have to just be interested in everything. Once you start to adopt that mindset, then I'd just come home and start Googling random things like, wow, this is really interesting actually. And actually I had to cut 130,000 words from the book, and I still think it's probably a few thousand words too long, just because and they're about the most random subjects imaginable. So there was quite a brain dump of Googling. I did a lot of time on Wikipedia over the last year.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, a typical book, might have 80,000 words. So if you cut 130, that's a lot.
That reminds me, I was curious about something else, which is that I feel like a lot of the sections of the book, whether it's like a burnt out car like you'd mentioned, or just sort of crumbling industrial sort of zones, there's a sense that the like, at least in that part of where you are, that the civilization, the sort of infrastructure built on top of the natural environment is weakening, right? And I'm just curious if, after an experience like this, because you described how so many of these grids are kind of gray spaces just filled with buildings and things like that, if you can kind of see through that, and now you see the land beneath it, now you see the sort of ecosystem that this is all built on top of. I had that experience when I moved to San Francisco a long time ago, after living basically in the countryside for my whole life, and I was shocked by the concrete and shocked by the electricity and shocked by the lights. And then I'd notice like little tufts of grass that I recognized, or like little bushes that I knew that we had from where I grew up. And after a while, especially when we started riding a bike around, it almost like a scene from a sci-fi movie, where the buildings kind of would just lift and you would just see what was underneath. And I felt more connected to it. I felt more, I could identify with that place more than I could with the big buildings. And I'm wondering if something like that kind of happens as well with your experience, that after a certain amount of time, kind of the fluff of humanity kind of goes away, or maybe it's screwed stuff up too much and you can't. But I mean, can you look past that at all?
I actually came to really like the industrial side of things, like these giant chimneys or weird metal pipe things that I've got no idea what they are, but I was really interested, starting nosing around the back of industrial yards and stuff. So I actually really enjoyed the weeks that were so-called ugly. In many ways they were my favorite, and one aspect that I really liked about that, which I think does link to your experience, is the notion of rewilding, the way trees start to grow up through the sidewalk, and if you neglect an industrial yard for 10 years, then trees start to grow and the natural world comes back. So although these places were quite ugly and quite sometimes falling down and derelict, they actually filled me with hope, which was just, if we don't screw this place up too much and just step back a bit, nature will come pouring and bouncing back. And a lot of the world saw that during lockdown, didn't they? So wildlife coming into city streets. Chernobyl now, the nuclear cities are wonderful woodlands. So yeah, I actually was quite uplifted by the so-called ugly industrial things and the scope for rewilding there.
And that comes through in the book. I mean, that's it's clear that you have that you're pretty excited about that. That's the industrial zones, and it's another reason that it's not a depressing book. I mean, I guess we've kind of harped on some of the downsides of civilization and stuff like that, but you do a really good job of bringing life into these sorts of things, and that optimism is clear when you're discussing these sort of areas where life is coming back.
Thank you.
It's a book of observation is what it is. It's observing. It's taking the time to look. And so you see, to be binary, you see the good and the bad, and you talk about both. And you said earlier that you thought about this originally, maybe like this is micro adventures, 2. I see it as a beautiful companion to micro adventures and complementary, because it's not about the moving and the going, it's about the slowing and the seeing. And that changes you, in ways that just moving quickly never will.
Well, hopefully it'd be nice if people do both. They load up their bike and their tent and their pack raft and they go for the weekend, which is what we've all been encouraging people to do for years and loving doing ourselves. But now when they actually get to that place, then they do a bit of this other stuff as well, of like noticing the nature and the problems and looking for solutions, and then coming home and actually being an activist in some ways of what can I actually do to fix these places as well.
Yeah, it's clear that there's a through line that you want to, through your experience, encourage people to have their own transformative revolutions of caring about their backyards. So to take us out, I'm wondering, I have a passage that I would love you to read that I thought really captures the book. Would you mind? Do you have that there?
I do, yeah, and thank you for
thanks.
Picking this one up. Okay. The more... Oh, by the way, I'm now going to read this and think, oh, man, this sucks. I wish I could rewrite that paragraph.
Hey, we know, we get it. We get it.
No, it's great.
Once I've written a book, I literally never open it ever again.
That's
in
probably
case I
a good
see
move.
spelling mistakes. Yeah. Right. Anyway, with that a disclaimer aside, here we go. The more I pay attention, the more I notice. The more I notice, the more I learn. The more I learn, the more I enjoy. The more I enjoy, the more I pay attention. This positive feedback loop of learning and loving is what schools dream of generating in the classroom. But in my case, it didn't take hold until I began mooching around my neighbourhood with a camera, a notebook, and a handful of apps. On my map, there are no forests free from litter, no hills to raise the heartbeat, no clean rivers to swim in, no ocean with crashing waves, no town bustling with people who enjoy the same things as I do. But the days when I set out to explore, to cycle, walk, photograph, sit and think, were becoming the highlight of my weeks. Out here, I did not notice what I was missing, but rather celebrated all that I was finding.
Man, that's beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is Alastair Humphreys. His book is Local. It is one of, I believe, 12 or 13 or more books that you have written, I think.
16. 16.
Sorry to cut you 25% short. And so we're going to put all Al's info in the usual places that you can get them on our website and our YouTube notes and all that. So, but he's easily found, alastairhumphreys.com. His book is Local. And when is the book out now? I should have asked you this right at the beginning, but what is the publication date?
Publication date is 11th of January.
Okay, so upcoming. We're recording this in late November, so of 2023. So take a good look at it. Make sure you follow him if you don't already. So in my mind, Alastair Humphreys has done as much as anybody through Micro Adventures and through his communication and encouragement and speaking to get people out there and making themselves better and the planet better for it. Al, again, thank you so much. It's been a joy.
My pleasure. Thank you. I've been a big fan of you guys for years, so it's been great.
That's great.
Thank you.
Thanks,
All right.
man.
All right, everybody, take care. Thank you for listening. We'll catch you next time.